They threw rotten food at obese girl in the market. Mountain man stood in front and protected her. The autumn sun hung low over Fort Bridger's trading post, casting long shadows across the dusty market square. The year was 1852, and the Wyoming Territory settlement buzzed with activity as traders, trappers, and travelers bartered for supplies before winter's grip tightened around the mountains. Among the crowd, 17-year-old Molly Patterson moved timidly between the stalls, her round face flushed with effort and embarrassment. Molly's parents had sent her to purchase flour and salt, necessities their family desperately needed before the first snows arrived. But every step she took drew stares, whispers, and barely concealed mockery. Her considerable size made her an easy target in a frontier settlement where survival depended on strength and endurance, where harsh judgments were passed as freely as gossip. "Look at the size of that one," a woman muttered loudly to her companion, not bothering to lower her voice. "Eaten more than her share while decent folks go hungry." Molly kept her eyes fixed on the ground, clutching the coins her mother had given her. She'd learned long ago that responding only made things worse. The verbal cruelty she could almost bear, she'd heard it all her life. But today felt different. Today, the hostility in the air seemed thicker, more dangerous. Near the vegetable stand, a group of young men lounged against a wagon, passing a bottle between them. Their eyes tracked Molly's movement with predatory interest. The tallest one, a lean fellow named Jack Drummond, with a cruel twist to his mouth, elbowed his companions. "Hey, boys! Looks like someone's going to buy out the whole market," he called out, loud enough for everyone to hear. Laughter rippled through the crowd. Molly's hands trembled as she reached for a sack of flour. The merchant, old Tom Henderson, gave her a sympathetic look but said nothing. Speaking up for her would only turn the mob's attention toward him, and he had a business to protect. "Tell me something, girl," Jack continued, swaggering closer. "You leave anything for the rest of us, or you planning to eat the whole territory clean?" "Please, I just want to buy supplies and leave," Molly whispered, her voice barely audible. "What's that? Can't hear you over all that wheezing." Jack's friends howled with laughter. Then it happened. A rotten tomato sailed through the air and struck Molly square in the shoulder, exploding in a spray of putrid pulp. She gasped, stumbling backward. Before she could recover, another projectile followed, a spoiled potato that caught her in the chest. "Food fight!" someone yelled, and suddenly the air filled with rotten vegetables, spoiled fruit, and anything else the crowd could grab from the refuse piles near the market stalls. Molly raised her arms to protect her face, tears streaming down her cheeks as the barrage continued. The crowd's laughter grew louder, more vicious. Some stood by watching, uncomfortable but unwilling to intervene. Others actively participated, caught up in the mob mentality that transformed ordinary people into monsters. "Stop! Please stop!" Molly cried out, but her voice was lost in the chaos. A particularly large rotten cabbage was arcing toward her head when suddenly a massive hand shot out and caught it mid-flight. The crowd's laughter died as if someone had slammed a door on it. The man who had caught the cabbage stood well over 6 feet tall, with shoulders as broad as an ox yoke. His buckskin clothing was worn but well maintained, decorated with intricate beadwork that suggested both Native American influence and exceptional craftsmanship. A thick beard, streaked with gray, covered the lower half of his weathered face, but his eyes, pale blue and piercing as a winter sky, held an intensity that made even the boldest man take a step back. This was Silas Blackwood, a name whispered with respect and a touch of fear throughout the territory. For 20 years, he'd lived alone in the high mountains, trapping beaver, hunting elk, and trading furs. He came down to Fort Bridger perhaps twice a year, spoke to almost no one, and had a reputation for being harder than the granite peaks he called home. "Who threw this?" Silas's voice rumbled like distant thunder, low and dangerous. The crowd had gone utterly silent. Even Jack Drummond, who'd been so bold moments before, seemed to shrink under that penetrating gaze. When no one answered, Silas tossed the rotten cabbage aside and positioned himself directly in front of Molly, his broad back creating a human shield. "Anyone else feel like throwing something?" he asked quietly. "Because the next person who does will answer to me." "Now hold on, Blackwood." Jack found his courage again, though he kept his distance. "This ain't your concern. We're just having some fun with the fat girl." "Fun?" Silas repeated the word as if tasting something foul. "You call terrorizing a young woman fun?" "She ain't exactly suffering from lack of food," another voice called from the crowd, emboldened by anonymity. Silas's hand moved to the large knife sheathed at his belt. Not threatening, exactly, but a clear reminder that he was not a man to be trifled with. "Any man here brave enough to say that to my face? Step forward." No one moved. "That's what I thought." Silas turned slightly, his voice gentler now. "Miss, you hurt?" Molly couldn't speak. She could only shake her head, overwhelmed by the sudden intervention. No one had ever stood up for her before. No one had ever put themselves between her and cruelty. "Tom," Silas addressed the merchant, "the young lady came here to buy supplies. I suggest you help her do that while I have a word with these brave folks." Tom Henderson moved quickly, grateful for the excuse to break the tension. "Yes, sir, Mr. Blackwood, right away." As Tom helped Molly gather what she needed, Silas turned back to the crowd. His voice carried clearly across the market square, though he didn't raise it. "I've lived in these mountains longer than most of you have been alive. I've faced grizzlies, survived winters that would break most men, and fought alongside warriors who could teach you all about true courage. And you know what I've learned?" He paused, his eyes sweeping across the gathered faces. "That the measure of a person has nothing to do with their size, their appearance, or how much they eat. It's about what's in their heart and how they treat others." "Easy for you to say," someone muttered. "You ain't got to worry about—" "About what?" Silas interrupted. "About someone being different from you? About someone not fitting your narrow view of how a person should look?" He shook his head in disgust. "I've known men who could barely lift a rifle who had more courage than entire regiments. I've known women who didn't fit anyone's idea of beauty, who showed more grace and strength than all you so-called civilized folks combined." Jack Drummond, stinging from the embarrassment of backing down, tried one more time. "You can't tell us how to—" "I can, and I am." Silas took a step toward him, and Jack immediately retreated. "This young lady came here peacefully to buy supplies for her family. She harmed no one, threatened no one, and you attacked her like a pack of cowards. If that's what passes for civilization these days, I'll take my mountains any day." Behind him, Tom had finished helping Molly. Her arms were full of packages, and though she was still covered in rotten food, she stood a little straighter now. "Let's get you home, miss," Silas said, his voice returning to that surprisingly gentle tone. "I'll see you there safely." I can manage," Molly stammered, though her voice wavered. "I'm sure you can. But I'm heading that direction anyway, and I'd consider it an honor to accompany you." It was said so matter-of-factly, with such genuine respect, that Molly felt something crack inside her, all the walls she'd built to protect herself from constant hurt. Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks, but these were different from the ones she'd cried before. They walked through the parting crowd in silence. No one dared throw another thing or even speak. Silas collected his pack mule, which had been waiting patiently near the trading post, and they set off toward the Patterson homestead, which lay 2 miles outside the settlement. For the first mile, neither spoke. Molly was too overwhelmed by everything that had happened, and Silas seemed content with silence. But as they left the settlement behind and the open prairie stretched before them, Molly finally found her voice. "Why did you help me?" Silas was quiet for a long moment, long enough that Molly thought he might not answer. Then he said, 20 years ago, I had a daughter, Sarah. She would have been about your age now." "Would have been?" Molly asked softly. "Cholera took her when she was 7. Took my wife, too, and my son." His voice remained steady, but Molly heard the decades of grief beneath it. Sarah was a tiny little thing, frail from birth. Folks used to say she wouldn't survive, that she was too weak for frontier life. But she had a spirit bigger than the whole territory. She never let anyone's opinions dim her light. He paused, adjusting the pack on his mule. After I lost them, I couldn't stand to be around people anymore. Couldn't stand the judgment, the shallow cruelty, the way folks treat each other when they think no one's watching. So I went into the mountains and stayed there. "I'm sorry," Molly whispered. "Don't be sorry, miss. I'm telling you this because I want you to understand something. When I saw those people attacking you, I saw every person who ever made Sarah feel less than she was. Every person who judged her for being different, for not being strong enough or healthy enough or whatever enough. And I thought, if Sarah were here, if someone were doing that to her, I'd want someone to stand up for her." Molly wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "No one's ever stood up for me before." "Then those people are fools." Silas glanced at her. "Tell me something, miss. What's your name, by the way?" Molly Patterson." "Miss Patterson, then. Tell me, do you know why those people treated you that way?" Molly gave a bitter laugh. "Because I'm fat. Because I eat too much. Because I'm—" "Wrong." Silas's interruption was firm, but not unkind. "They treated you that way because they're afraid." "Afraid? Of me?" "Not of you specifically. They're afraid of anything different, anything that challenges their comfortable little views of how the world should be. They're afraid of their own inadequacies, their own failures, so they find someone to look down on, makes them feel better about themselves." They walked in silence for another few minutes before Molly spoke again. "You really think that?" "I know that. I've seen it all my life, Miss Patterson. People tear others down because building themselves up is too much work." The Patterson homestead came into view, a modest cabin with a small barn and a vegetable garden that was winding down for the season. Smoke rose from the chimney, and Molly's mother appeared on the porch, her face going pale when she saw her daughter's condition. "Molly, what happened?" Elizabeth Patterson hurried down the steps, her hands reaching for her daughter. Silas stepped forward. "Mrs. Patterson, I presume? Your daughter was set upon by some folks at the market. She's not hurt, just shaken. I wanted to make sure she got home safe." Elizabeth's face hardened as she took in the rotten food covering Molly's dress. "Who did this?" "Does it matter?" Silas asked gently. "What matters is that Miss Patterson conducted herself with dignity and courage, while others showed themselves to be cowards." Molly's father, Robert, emerged from the barn, wiping his hands on his trousers. He was a tall man, though not as tall as Silas, with work-worn hands and a weary face. "What's all this commotion?" After Elizabeth explained, Robert's expression darkened. "Those sons of—" He caught himself, glancing at Molly. "I'll go back to town and give them a piece of my mind." "No, Pa," Molly said quietly. "That'll only make it worse." "The girl's right," Silas agreed. "Fighting fire with fire just leaves everyone burned. But maybe I could make a suggestion?" Robert looked at the mountain man with curiosity. "What kind of suggestion?" "I've got a winter coming on alone in my cabin. Could use some help with the heavier work, cutting firewood, preserving meat, that sort of thing. I'd be willing to pay fair wages and provide food. And I could teach whoever comes up there some survival skills, trapping, hunting, reading the weather, useful knowledge for frontier life." The offer hung in the air for a moment before Molly realized what he was actually suggesting. "You mean me?" "If you're interested," Silas said, looking directly at her with those clear blue eyes. "And if your parents agree, of course. I've got a spare room in my cabin. Nothing fancy, but it's warm and dry. My place is about 3 days' ride into the high country." Elizabeth and Robert exchanged glances, having one of those silent conversations that long married couples can have. Finally, Elizabeth spoke. "Mr. Blackwood, we don't even know you." That's fair, ma'am. I'm Silas Blackwood. I've been trapping these mountains for 20 years. Tom Henderson at the trading post can vouch for me. I've never cheated anyone, never caused trouble. I keep to myself mostly, but I'm offering legitimate work and a chance for your daughter to learn skills that could serve her well. Why? Robert asked bluntly. Why offer this to Molly? Silas didn't flinch from the question. Because I see potential in her that others are too blind to notice, because sometimes people need a chance to discover their own strength away from those who want to keep them weak, and because, he paused, because if my daughter had lived, I would have wanted someone to give her an opportunity like this. Molly felt something stirring in her chest, hope, maybe, or the beginning of courage. I want to go, she said, surprising herself with the firmness in her voice. Molly, her mother started. Ma, I can't stay here. Not anymore. Every day is the same. The stares, the comments, the cruelty. Maybe in the mountains, away from all that, I can figure out who I really am, who I'm meant to be. Elizabeth's eyes filled with tears, but she nodded slowly. You've always been stronger than people give you credit for, sweetheart. Stronger than we give you credit for, maybe. Robert cleared his throat roughly. If you're going to do this, you'll need proper supplies. Cold weather gear, sturdy boots. I'll make sure she has everything she needs, Silas assured them. And I give you my word, I'll keep her safe and treat her with the respect she deserves. You can come visit once the trails are clear in spring. See for yourself how she's doing. It was decided. Over the next 2 weeks, preparations were made. Silas helped Molly acquire proper winter clothing, teaching her which furs worked best for different conditions, how to layer for maximum warmth without restricting movement. He showed her how to pack supplies efficiently, how to waterproof her gear, and basic wilderness safety. During this time, Molly learned that Silas wasn't the silent, brooding mountain man everyone assumed him to be. He had a dry sense of humor, a vast knowledge of the natural world, and a gentleness that contradicted his intimidating appearance. He told her stories of his travels, encounters with Native American tribes who taught him their ways, narrow escapes from avalanches and predators, and the quiet beauty of watching dawn break over snow-covered peaks. The mountains don't care what you look like, he told her one evening as they prepared her pack. They only care about your spirit, your will to survive, and how you treat the land. Up there, you'll find out who you really are without all the noise of other people's opinions. The day came for departure. Elizabeth cried, holding Molly tight. You write to us when you can get letters out. And remember, you can always come home. I know, Ma, but I think this is what I need. Robert gripped her shoulder. You're braver than I ever gave you credit for. Make us proud. She already has, Silas said quietly. The journey into the high country was unlike anything Molly had experienced. The first day was relatively easy, following established trails through foothills dotted with aspen groves, turning gold with autumn. But as they climbed higher, the terrain grew more challenging. Silas set a steady pace, never too fast, checking regularly to ensure Molly was managing. To her surprise, she was managing. Her legs burned, her lungs ached in the thin air, but she kept going. And with each step away from Fort Bridger, she felt something lifting from her shoulders, the weight of constant judgment, the exhaustion of always bracing for the next cruel comment. They camped that first night beside a rushing creek. Silas taught her how to build a proper fire, how to position it for maximum warmth and minimal smoke, how to cook simple but satisfying meals over open flames. As darkness fell and stars emerged in incredible profusion across the mountain sky, Molly realized she'd never felt so simultaneously small and significant. It's beautiful, she breathed. Wait until you see it from the cabin, Silas said, stirring the fire. On clear nights, you can see all the way to forever. The second day was harder. They climbed steep switchbacks, crossed narrow ridges where the wind howled like something alive. Molly's muscles screamed protest, but she refused to complain. Silas seemed to sense when she needed rest, calling breaks without making her feel weak for needing them. "You're doing well," he told her during one such rest, "better than many experienced travelers." "Really? I don't lie, Miss Patterson. You've got determination. That counts for more than anything else in these mountains." Manthi. By the third day, Molly's body had started adapting. The pain was still there, but it felt purposeful now, like she was building something rather than just enduring. And when they crested a final ridge and Silas said, "There, that's home," Molly gasped. The cabin sat in a natural bowl between peaks, protected from the worst winds by the surrounding ridges. A stream ran nearby, its waters crystal clear. Dense forest provided both shelter and fuel. The cabin itself was larger than Molly expected, built from sturdy logs with a stone chimney and a covered porch. "It's perfect," she said. Silas smiled, the first real smile she'd seen from him. "Let's get you settled." The cabin's interior was simple but comfortable. A main room with a stone fireplace, a kitchen area with a cast-iron stove, and 2 bedrooms, one for Silas, one that would be Molly's. The walls were lined with shelves holding books, tools, and supplies. Furs covered the floor and the single chair near the fire. Everything was neat, organized, purposeful. "You can arrange your room however you like," Silas told her. "Make it yours. This is your home now, for as long as you want it to be." The first weeks were a revelation. Silas taught Molly everything: how to read animal tracks, how to predict weather from cloud formations and animal behavior, how to move through the forest without disturbing it. He showed her which plants were edible, which medicinal, which poisonous. He taught her to shoot, to trap, to dress game, to preserve meat. The work was hard, harder than anything Molly had done before. But it was honest work, work that had purpose and results she could see. And something amazing happened. Her body, which had always felt like an enemy in Fort Bridger, began to feel like an ally. She was strong. She could chop wood for hours, haul water, carry heavy packs. Her size, which had been used as evidence of laziness and gluttony, proved to be an advantage in the physically demanding mountain life. "You've got natural strength," Silas observed one day, as she easily lifted a log he'd been preparing to split. "Most people have to build up to that." Molly looked down at her arms, seeing them differently now, not as embarrassing evidence of excess, but as tools that served her well. "I never thought of it that way." "That's because people in town don't know the difference between strength and appearance. Up here, we measure what matters." As autumn deepened into early winter, Molly found herself changing in ways that had nothing to do with her body. She walked taller, spoke more confidently. The constant voice in her head that had whispered she wasn't good enough, wasn't worthy, wasn't acceptable. It grew quieter each day until finally it fell silent altogether. One snowy evening, as they sat by the fire with Silas reading aloud from one of his books — he had an impressive collection, accumulated over 2 decades — Molly realized she was happy. Genuinely, deeply happy in a way she'd never been before. "Thank you," she said suddenly, interrupting his reading. Silas looked up. "For what?" "For seeing me, for giving me this chance, for showing me that I'm more than what people said I was." "Molly," Silas set down his book, his expression serious. "I didn't show you anything. I just gave you space to discover what was already there. Everything you've accomplished, every skill you've learned, every challenge you've overcome. That's all you. That's who you always were. You just needed to get away from people trying to convince you otherwise." Tears ran down Molly's cheeks, but she was smiling. "I don't think I can ever go back to living how I was before." "Then don't. The world is bigger than Fort Bridger. You've got skills now, knowledge. When spring comes, you can decide what you want to do. Stay here, go somewhere new, return home but on your own terms. The choice is yours." Winter set in fully, locking them into their mountain sanctuary. Molly didn't feel trapped. She felt free in ways she'd never imagined possible. She learned to navigate by stars, to predict avalanche danger, to survive in conditions that would kill unprepared travelers. She read every book in Silas's collection, some of them twice. They had long conversations about philosophy, history, human nature. "You know," Silas said one night, "you remind me of Sarah, not in appearance but in spirit. She had that same fire, that same refusal to let circumstances define her. I wish I could have met her. I think she would have liked you, and I think she'd be happy knowing that in a way, she led me to help someone who needed it." He poked the fire, sending sparks spiraling up the chimney. "I've been alone a long time, Molly, by choice mostly. But having you here, it's reminded me that isolation isn't the same as peace, that healing doesn't mean hiding. Are you thinking about coming down from the mountains more often? Maybe, or maybe you're thinking about staying up here and helping an old man who's finally ready to stop running from memories." He glanced at her with a slight smile. "Could use a partner in the fur trade, someone smart enough to negotiate better prices than I ever managed." Molly laughed. "Is that your way of offering me a permanent position? If you want it, no pressure, but you've proven yourself 10 times over, and I'd be proud to work alongside you." Spring arrived slowly in the high country, sneaking in with subtle signs, the quality of light changing, birds returning, snow melting from south-facing slopes. As the trails became passable, Silas and Molly prepared for the journey down to Fort Bridger. She would visit her parents, but she already knew she'd be returning to the mountains. This was her home now. The trading post looked smaller somehow when they arrived. Molly noticed details she'd missed before, the shoddiness of some buildings, the suspicious glances people gave outsiders, the general air of judgment that hung over everything. But she also noticed something else. The way people looked at her had changed. She walked differently now, carried herself with confidence. The winter in the mountains had hardened her body further, but softened something in her spirit, burned away the shame and replaced it with self-assurance. Tom Henderson greeted them warmly. "Miss Patterson, heard you were up in the high country with Silas. Folks been talking about it all winter." "I'm sure they have," Molly said dryly. "Well, you look—" Tom searched for words. "You look strong, healthy, happy." "I am all those things." Her parents' reunion was tearful and joyful. Elizabeth held Molly at arm's length, studying her face. "You're different." "I am, but I'm also more myself than I've ever been." Molly told them about her winter, the skills she'd learned, the beauty she'd witnessed, the peace she'd found. "I'm going back," she finished. "Silas has offered me a partnership. We're going to expand the operation, maybe bring in supplies for other trappers, establish better trading relationships with the native tribes." Robert and Elizabeth exchanged one of their silent conversations. Then Robert nodded. "We always knew you had it in you to do great things. We just didn't know what form it would take." That evening, Molly walked through Fort Bridger one last time. She passed the market square where she'd been humiliated, where rotten food had been thrown at her. She felt no anger now, only a distant pity for people so small-minded that cruelty was their entertainment. She turned a corner and nearly collided with Jack Drummond. He started to speak, to say something undoubtedly crude, but something in Molly's eyes stopped him. She wasn't the frightened girl from months ago. She looked at him not with fear or shame, but with the calm assessment of someone who had survived real challenges and found him utterly insignificant by comparison. "Excuse me," she said simply, and walked past him. She didn't look back. At dawn the next morning, Molly and Silas loaded their pack mules and prepared to return to the mountains. A small crowd had gathered. Her parents, Tom Henderson, even a few townspeople who'd heard about the remarkable transformation of the girl they'd once mocked. "Will you come back to visit?" Elizabeth asked, though she already knew the answer. "Of course, Ma, but my life is up there now." Molly gestured toward the mountains, their peaks glowing pink in the rising sun. "With someone who saw me for who I really am and gave me the chance to become who I was meant to be." Silas cleared his throat, uncomfortable with the attention. "We should get moving. Weather's changing. As they rode out of Fort Bridger, Molly took one last look at the settlement that had been her prison for 17 years. She felt no regret, no longing for what she was leaving behind. Only gratitude for the mountain man who had stood in front of her when cruelty came calling, and in doing so had changed the entire trajectory of her life. The mountains rose before them, vast and welcoming. Molly urged her horse forward, feeling the pull of home. Behind her, she heard Tom Henderson say to someone in the crowd, "That's the bravest person I've ever seen. Took everything life threw at her and came out stronger." And for once, everyone agreed. In the years that followed, Molly and Silas built a thriving business. Their reputation for fair dealing and quality furs spread throughout the territory. Molly's skill at negotiation made them wealthy by frontier standards. She eventually wrote a book about mountain survival that became essential reading for settlers heading west. But more than any material success, Molly had found something infinitely more valuable. She had found herself, stripped of all the lies that cruelty had tried to make her believe. She had learned that worth wasn't measured in appearance or society's approval, but in courage, kindness, and the strength to become who you truly are. And on quiet evenings, sitting on her porch and watching sunset paint the peaks gold and crimson, Molly would sometimes remember that autumn day in Fort Bridger's Market Square. She would remember the rotten food flying, the crowd's laughter, and her own despair. But mostly, she would remember a mountain man stepping in front of her, broad shoulders blocking the world's cruelty, his voice rumbling like thunder. "Anyone else feel like throwing something? Because the next person who does will answer to me." That was the moment her life had truly begun. That was the moment she learned that one person standing up could change everything. The mountains held many lessons, but that one, about courage, about seeing beyond surface judgments, about the power of compassion, that lesson echoed through the peaks forever, carried on winds that whispered of redemption, dignity, and the unbreakable strength of the human spirit.